So we're on a Monday morning once again. It's this touch of spring in the air, I think we're saying, Pat, in Donegal, as it is here.
Well, Jude, there's always a sort of light that comes with spring, and there's a lovely light outside today, and the sun's shining now. I'm not saying it's Spanish day or anything, but there's a sort of Spanish feel to it in the sense that the light is out there, and it's you will certainly not go outside with a t-shirt on today, but there's a whole feel that maybe. The grass is growing and flowers are growing and the tide has turned, that spring is here.
Do you find that? I have a theory that people who live in sunny climes have a sunnier disposition, whereas Nordic people moving up north of Europe, they tend to be gloomy and black and dark and always.
I have a friend, by the way, Jude, who mirrors that. He claims you can nearly judge people by what their alcohol drink of choice is. He says, look at Russia, cold, vodka. He says, then come to Spain, wine, red wine, warm. And he says, what are the Caribbean, rum, and he says the wine, and he says the drink of choice nearly reflects the mood or the personality of the people.
Well, I think there's something in it. I mean, certainly if you go, you go to Spain on a regular basis. My God, You're there every fortnight nearly. But you would agree, I think, that the people have a sort of a outgoing way of living.
They live outdoors, Jude. Like, I haven't been there much. We were there years ago before COVID. We haven't been very. In fact, I think we've only been there once since COVID. But we used to go regularly because, like, I'm retired and the wife's retired, and my dear missus was the greatest you've ever seen in getting Ryanair cheap flights. We had more cheap flights than you could shake a stick at. But anyway, the bottom line is, hey, Jude, it's a lovely place. It's an outdoor life. I watch sometimes a place in the sun there. It's on in Channel 4 somewhere. And these people are saying, I need to change the kitchen. I never noticed the kitchen when I was living. You sit outside most of the time. What under God are you sitting outside when you're in Spain? The only reason you go in Spain is you go to bed.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get too involved because there's a lot of stuff to cover. But you never thought of retiring to somewhere like that? Because there's an awful lot of people, particularly British people, who had moved to Spain in their retirement and find it cheaper to live there, or other places. I know my daughter met a woman from Britain in Thailand, and she had retired at 55 or something, and she could far cheaper to live there.
Absolutely. The sort of the temptation is there, but we've got kids and grandkids, and my dear missus, I know she keeps saying that she will, but I don't think she will. She really will, because she's too close to the kids and the grandkids. And what we would do, what I'd like to do, is go out for 2 and 3 weeks at a time every so often. Break up the winters here.
No, that's true. But you're right. It's people in the end that makes for a happy life, or otherwise. Okay, let's get stuck into these various topics. The first one is this question of the Ukrainian immigrants into the south. Like by the end of this month, 20,000 Ukrainian refugees will be in the south of Ireland. Now, not everybody's too nuts about that. A man called Lucky Kambule, who is the co-founder of the movement of asylum seekers in Ireland, he says, well, that's great. It's good that they're giving support to the Ukrainians that are fleeing from danger and war. But what about Middle Eastern, African countries, and people who from those places who've had to wait for years before they even consider? What would your take on that be, Pat?
There's an element of truth in it, Jude, and I remember somebody said, they look like us, they're blue-eyed and blonde-haired type thing. That's been, I think one of the people on an American TV program made that the difference between the Ukrainians and the Syrians was they quote, look like us. And there's an element of truth in that, Jude, and you can't get away from it. Now, I know I've heard people saying, wait a minute, this is a war within our sort of sphere of influence. It's in Europe and so on, and it does make a difference that the people in Africa and other places they could go to, where if you live in Ukraine, you can hardly head to Russia, you can hardly head to Saudi Arabia or wherever. You have to come west, you have to come towards Ireland and Britain and France and Germany. So there's an element of that. But having said that, Jude, that's only a side issue. There is a point there that a lot of people from other direct provisions have been there for 10, 12 years, some, and they haven't been treated particularly well, yet the door's been flung open for Ukrainians.
Yeah, I suppose it's the case that you wouldn't say there should be less fewer doors thrown up for the Ukrainians. We'd say that you'd level up, as Boris would say, that you bring the others up to a similar level of generosity. There's something like over 8,000 people who have been living in that are in here and are in the south of Ireland, that is, and in direct provision or emergency accommodation.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people. And if you stop to think about it for a minute, it's no way to have children and trying to bring them up or send them to school or do anything if you're living in a direct provision place or even a hotel.
But someone Jude, it does boil down to it. I think you identify, and it seems to be the case that there seems to be a different attitude out there to people who, to use that term again, it looks like us, and you can't get away from it. It does seem to be the case. Like I don't see any justification for keeping somebody, a family, for 5 and 7 years. Now, by the way, Jude, I remember some of the Syrian families, like 5 and 7 years. I remember one time in RT listening to one guy was a pharmacist and the other guy was a qualified vet, and neither of them could get jobs in Ireland. And you thought, at a time when surely those people their skills could have been put to use. So it was sort of an own goal as well.
I've come across cases like that quite a bit where people. Well, actually, you find something like that in the States too. I know that with teaching. Where they wouldn't recognize your qualifications from here because they weren't American. I thought it was pretty rich, actually. But I think actually you need to be very careful with this. I quite accept the fact that we identify far more readily with people who look like ourselves. And as a newspaper man, you would know that local stories, killing of somebody within 5 miles of the town is a big story. Whereas, 20,000 people dying in China or somewhere is much less of a story. But at the same time, there's just the whiff, I think, of racism behind our willingness, or at least we accept the fact that because these people are like us, we're more open to them, and because the others don't, well, we don't, and it's human nature, we understand it. I think that's a very dangerous and slippery path to go down in order to.
Well, I can't argue with it because I think pretty much the same myself. Like if you ask me, could I justify direct provision as we speak? Not at all. I think it's inhuman to keep a family in a room for 5 years, Jude. It was crap food, poor accommodation, giving them, what is it, €20 a week? And put them into somewhere like, they tried to put them in someplace in Leitrim and in Moville now. And by the way, the place they were going to put them in Moville County was burned, and I think something similar happened about Leitrim. So our wee track record is the whole question about how welcome we really are. I would like, I would love some academics to do a wee bit of research into just how true it all is.
I think in some ways it goes back to the media, doesn't it? To TV, because TV is covering this war very carefully and closely. And we have all these shots of people weeping and destroyed buildings and so on. Whereas the Yemen or Ethiopia or Libya, we know they're happening, but you don't have it night after night. It doesn't. So we sort of get moved by the things that are thrust in our faces.
You said it earlier on, Jude. It is true. Like, to use your analogy of the local paper, the stories that happen on your door it used to be in the local, national, and international. That's the rule. For a lot of newspapers, particularly local ones. Well, the same is true of we're more moved by things that affect us personally than the sort of reading about them. Like. Oh, no, wait, no, you're not.
I don't think that's right, Pat. Maybe you didn't mean to say that.
But what I mean to say, Jude, is we see the Ukrainians on TV day and daily. We see the coverage. And it's coming into our doors and all the rest. The Yemen, like Jude, in fairness, all I've seen is usually on social media about Yemen, and and I don't see I see starvation and all the rest of it. And I have, on my limited way, condemned the Saudis for what they're at. But what's me condemning them? I don't hear the Western world condemning them all that much.
That's true. And actually, when you look at one of the things that we use as an excuse is, well, we haven't got room for them, or we can't afford them, or that kind of thing. But it's not just that these people want to be economic migrants. Like people from the Congo are fleeing from torture. And so imagine a guy coming to your door and saying, "Take me in. I'm going to be tortured." And you say, "No, you have to go back. No, go ahead there.
Go back. No.
You wouldn't dream of doing it.
There's no way to, Irish people, by and large, have been very good. Like, we've taken in a lot of people. Well, it was what, 10,000? I think it's 9,700 or something as we speak. Ukrainians coming through the door. Like, myself and my wife have offered our house for people to stay here. Now, whether they take it up or not, it's another matter. And you try and help. But the reality is, as I'm repeating myself now, we haven't covered ourselves in glory in the past. And some of the government's treatment of those seeking asylum here has been less than empathetic.
It's funny, it really is funny, given the fact that the Irish nation, people of Ireland, are flung all around the world, and we very much valued when we were accepted as equals or looked after or friendly hand. And here we are turning our back on many people and dragging our feet, at this stage with people who've been here for several years and they're still in these places where.
I didn't catch it. I think I saw it last night in RT. I think there might be a documentary coming up now, Jude. I'm totally open to correction this because I didn't pay attention to it. About 4 or 5 fellas, I presume of colour of some kind, walking through a small town, and a woman saying, "Look, I'm scared of these guys," and so on. But Jude, if I put 4 or 5 guys down in Burt here, walking around all day with nothing to do, whether they're a threat or not, the whole thing is they should be treated with respect and treated with dignity, given, if it's possible, jobs and employment, and allowed to earn. Under direct provision, you're not allowed to earn.
It's funny, again, we come to the thing about Black Lives Matter in the States, that black guys, and in England too, young black guys get stopped and searched far, far more often. Black guys in the States who get killed far more often. Prison populations far, far more percentage-wise of black people. And likewise, as you said, if there was 3 or 4 black guys came to a small village and were walking around now to do, the fact that they were black would, I hate to say it, but I think to a certain extent at least, it would influence people to see them as suspicious figures. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that?
No, that's it, even though maybe they've done zero wrong.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Let's get into a bit of smacking here. Smacking. I was reading this thing about Wales. I think it was only yesterday they did it. Wales.
No, it started this morning, Jude. This morning. Came into law, came into effect this morning.
All right, that's right. Yeah. Okay, this morning. Yesterday, you could have smacked your kid all around the kitchen. But today in Wales, you cannot. In fact, if you're visiting Wales, Pat, if you were visiting Wales with some of your grandchildren, and one of them did something that really annoyed you, you find yourself in trouble. What do you think of that? Do you think we should?
You left
the people to make up their own mind about their own family, no?
I must spend my life sitting on fences and things like this. Right, I've never had my own kids. I really genuinely haven't.
Never.
That does not mean for a second that I agree with spoiled kids or children that don't show respect. And my kids showed any disrespect, I'd say, "Come here, man, I want to talk to you." There, but I didn't. But my mother and father weren't big into slapping people around.
Tell me this: did they slap you at all? Did your parents?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah, mine too. And I, like you, I wouldn't have slapped my own kids. I slapped one of my kids at her little tap once, and I looked at my wife's face, and I never did it again. I just thought it was terrible. But you see, an awful lot of people. I've seen people who have slapped their children, and they'd say, "Really, I've got so many things that are pressing in me." And the only thing's going to get this child to quickly stop doing what they're doing is just a little smack. So what's the big deal about that? Do we need to put it into law? Should a parent not know what's best for their children rather than the government?
Jude, I tend to follow that theory. I don't think it should be a law now. But having said that, Jude, children do need protection. Jesus, there have been some awful cases of child abuse in recent times. And let's be honest, Jude, I remember clearly the most blatant example I ever came across. I was sitting chatting to this guy in the Dairy Journal one day, and he said to me, "Pat, I went to the Christian Brothers, and they used to beat the crap out of us. I've never done me any harm." And I'm looking at it, and I'm saying, "You're the one of the." No, the second word is up. The first word that I have ever come across. There's a guy who had a lot of problems, and I thought probably contributing to that problems was the way he was treated at school. And the way and Jude, I do not buy this thing that I don't. I really repeating again that I think respect for people and children, and I hate spoiled children, but I don't think battering the crap out of children is the way to go. Now, having said it, I agree totally with you. See, there must be occasions where a little slap on the backside when somebody's acting a bollocks, a child, and say, right, that's enough of that. I don't think the law's got any right to interfere with any parent doing that.
Yeah, but look at the way you chose, and I chose not to smack our children. I mean, when I think back, I shouted at them and stuff, but
So did I, yeah.
But I didn't smack them. I suppose, in a way, childhood is a preparation for adulthood, right?
Yeah.
And the great factor in most people is, what example do they see? My mother used to always go on about this, good example to others.
Yeah.
And that's true. You pick up on what's the thing to do from what other people around you are doing. So if your parents are treating you in a nice or a decent or a firm but not abusive way, the chances are you'll tend to go, not necessarily, but you'll tend to go the same way yourself. In fact, even further than that, because as you said, and I said, both of our parents would have at least on occasion smacked us.
Yeah.
In fact, more in my case, more than smacked us. But that didn't carry through. You were able to break that chain.
Looking back in childhood, my mother, used to stick, a rod on occasions. I'm not saying that, but no, I think there's way. Like me and my youngest son were having a conversation the other day, and he says, his mother, my wife, he says, wait until your father gets home and I tell him. And he says, no, some of that, he says, that was far worse. He says, well, I'd rather nearly slap, I prefer to slap than sort of, you coming home and saying, well, what did you do? He says, because it was sort of a moral thing then. He says it was far worse.
Well, you see, the thing is, people who use physical punishment would say, well, what lever do you have? You go to say kid's doing something wrong and you say, you shouldn't be doing that. Well, like, what's the sanction? What's the penalty?
I think you'd see kids who see what do you call it, who get slapped a lot as child. I think a lot of them grow up and think it's all right to slap their own child and maybe slap their wife when things don't. There's a lot of stuff that break down barriers. Like a lot of guys who beat up wives came from abusive homes as well, and so on. So, Jude, I am not saying, I'm not saying one thing just falls off, but I don't think it's a way to bring up kids by slapping them every time they do something wrong. I'll let one last thing then. You mentioned that your wife would say to sometimes the kids when they were small, wait till your dad comes, he'll sort you. But why would they have been concerned about that? Like, because you weren't going to punish them, you weren't going to physically. But as my dear Paddy said, his dad's far worse. He says the fact that you would be tight with me. He says that was far worse than slapping me. He says that you'd be disappointed in me. He says psychologically, he says that was far more to me. Yeah.
Isn't that very interesting? Of course, it's not that long. Like when I started teaching, it was perfectly fine to use the strap. And I remember these young guys coming in, younger than me even, into school in Derry, and God, they were slapping right, left, centre. And a lot of people used to say, "Oh my God, what do we do in these schools where kids are rough and tough, and we can't slap them?" But they managed. You can do it if you put yourself to it. And in the end, as I say, we really tend to model ourselves on the way people treat us. I suppose get rid of that, and then there's a better chance to get rid of it. Okay, move to a broader topic now. And when I say broad, I mean broad, and that's Boris Johnson. And you asked the question, is Boris Johnson a total buffoon? Well, that seemed to be like an easily answered question, but what were you thinking of when you asked that question?
When I read it, I think it was Saturday night, I thought, good, is there no sort of level this guy won't go to? To compare what do you call it, the Brexit vote with what's happening in Ukraine, I thought it was crass, and I really genuinely mean that. I thought it's disgraceful. By the way, even just before I go on, like, rather than trying to heal the wounds of Brexit, Johnson seems, amongst his own people in Britain, he seems to be trying to keep it going, and so on. But they say that people who voted in a referendum were on a par with the people of Ukraine fighting to be free. Good and merciful, Jude. First of all, Jude, the Brits joined the UK and were dying to join the EU, way back in 1973. They couldn't wait to join and so on, and it was very successful for them and so on. And they left of their own free choice, there was nobody forcing them in, and there was nobody forcing them out. So this sort of ridiculous thing that the EU was some sort of like a Russian invader. So I think it was actually in seriously bad taste on so many levels. Donald Tusk, the former the Polish Prime Minister, who was one of the main EU guys, says actually he found it personally offensive.
And you also have something to say about Rees Moggs. Come up with some comments.
Rees Moggs, then he was on. You see, that's the spring conference in Blackpool, the Tory Spring. He said he was meeting, and Jude, talk about pompous, absolute, and they vote for these people. I can't get this at all. He was at when he says, this now what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, it goes to prove what that the attacks on the Tory party and the Prime Minister were nothing more than fluff. You sort of go, you kidding? That was about 160,000 people died from COVID, and there was rules and regulations that the Tory party just totally ignored. And he seems to think now that Partygate is of no significance, and the people should just sort of let it go. You've got to be kidding.
Well, you see, I have a feeling that there's a partial truth in it, and only a partial truth. But it is a truth nonetheless. Like he would say, we voted to control our lives or our country, our nation, the UK. We were getting decisions made for us in Brussels, and we wanted our freedom in that sense. In another sphere, clearly it's a more radical one, but there are comparisons because the Ukrainians are fighting for their freedom. So he could argue that one's on a small scale, or at least a local scale, or a commercial scale, or an economic scale, and the others, flesh and blood and people dying. But there is a sort of a link. And likewise with Rees Mogg, we just spent our time talking there, and we were saying when things are far away, they are, well, maybe it's a different one. I was going to say there was a comparison between things being far away and less consequential, and things that happen on our doorstep seem to matter more. But he's saying that, Partygate, you didn't want to have Boris and company having party, but there was no question of people coming and putting them in prison or shooting them or anything.
No.
But at the same time, you tend to forget it. You say, you want me to investigate Boris Johnson and having parties? For God's sake, there's people dying out there, and that's what they're very glad to do.
Jude, first of all, let's go backtrack. Britain wasn't sitting at the table, and the EU, voiceless. They were part of the decision-making process, at the top table, and a very influential one. And they made decisions that helped them. Remember, Mrs. Thatcher blocked 2 or 3 major things in regard to the EU. Secondly, there was, I think it's about 164,000 people have died so far in Britain from COVID. Now, a lot of people in the early days couldn't go to their mother's funeral, their father's funeral, their brother's funeral, and whatever, and they were denied going to see people dying in hospital, and so on, so on. And there's no, excuse me, no point in rehashing all that. But the point is, they were a serious end. And for Rees Mogg now to use the Ukrainian crisis as a distraction for what went on in the past, he referred to it as fluff. It's not fluff. 164,000 people died, and they broke the rules, and they're sort of saying now, because something's moved on, that this is only a distraction and it shouldn't, and it was inconsequential and all the rest. No, it wasn't, Jude.
Of course it wasn't, but the fact of the matter is that most people aren't talking about it now. And Boris and company are very pleased with that. It's the old distraction technique. Excuse me. It's the old distraction technique where, don't, look at, there's a tiger. So you stop talking about something else.
A friend of mine said that what he called Princess Margaret's divorce was announced on the Saturday of the FA Cup final. Go ahead.
a very good day to break bad news. It's sort of disgusting, I guess. But at the same time, it's the old thing that people do. They associate things or they separate things. Yeah, we all know that advertising uses, they're going to sell you a car, so they have a model and a bikini draped across it.
Rees Mogg, it was just a pompous way. He says it was fundamentally trivial. And I'm just looking, you're going, I know, I was going to say gone F off, but you know what I'm getting at,
Yeah.
By the way, Jude, I cannot believe, I really don't know. Boris Johnson, there seems to be, I heard Claire Hanna on Talk Back today, and I agree 100% with Claire Hanna, that he seems to be aiming his comments at a certain section that no matter what he says, he is going to get away with it. and it doesn't matter. And he's just dividing the country, and we'll keep on dividing it because it's working.
Yeah, and that would rally the troops. Because you see, he's saying, look, we're fighting for our freedom with Brexit, and those guys are fighting. Everybody's in favor of the guys who are doing the fighting in Ukraine to get their freedom. So then if you can link your story, my Brexit story with that, oh, terrific. So, you know, then that'll be...
it's dishonest. It's absolutely insensitive. You know, it's, good God, Jude, it's unbelievable that they'd come away with that. You know, what is it, many thousand people have already done? Places destroyed, and he claims a vote and a referendum as on a par with that. Come on.
There's
anyway,
no depth, which some people will think. Okay, let's come really local now. 5 years ago today, you pointed this out to me. Martin McGuinness died, and the question is, what legacy has he left, or has he left a legacy?
I've seen that you're the man who wrote the book on this. You tell me.
I didn't write the book. I went around and asked other people. I interviewed people.
You're the guy who took it all in.
Maybe I've forgotten it all now. No, it's hard to say. Well, for many people, McGuinness's legacy will be out of blood and destruction and terrorizing and so on. For a lot of other people, I think it'll be, my own view would be, hard facts is that the IRA, which McGuinness was central to, brought unionism to the table and the British to the table and produced eventually the Good Friday Agreement. Does that seem too much of a stretch to say that's part of his legacy?
Well, Hume would totally disagree. He would say that, what do you call it, that the IRA's activity actually put the day further away. But having said that, my personal point of view, to answer my own question or part of the question, I would see McGuinness as a seriously significant figure when history of this place is written. I put him up there with sort of Michael Collins and people like that.
What did he do? What did he do?
Well, first of all, without question, he was leader of the IRA. And I remember a British Army officer telling me one time, had he been brought up in Britain, he would have been at least a colonel in the British Army, because his tactics were unbelievable. And he says, and this guy actually admired the IRA, I remember. He says there were some very, no, he didn't agree with them, obviously, but he said there were some very brave and principled people in the IRA. Now, McGuinness went from the boy general, the arm, you know, the guy who was believed in physical force, and then went big time risk. And I remember chatting to him one day. He said, Pat, this could get me killed. No, when he went for the peace process. And then he went on and he became first minister, or deputy first minister. He also stood with Hugh Inslee, or what we call him, Hugh Ward, after a killing by, you know, he went, in other words, when he went and he went along and met the Queen. So I'm saying, he went on one hell of a journey. And, you know, where I am saying today, we're in a much better place today because of Martin McGuinness than if he hadn't been there. In fact, I got the impression that of all the people, the unionists, the one politician they trusted was Martin McGuinness.
That's true. That's true. Well, certainly, I don't think there's very few people who would dispute the fact that his role in politics was very, very positive one. And that he, you know, reached his hand out to, as you say, the royalty, to unionists, to anybody in an effort to heal, you know, wounds from the past. I suppose some people would say, well, he was the one that created a lot of the wounds. John Hume would say, I suppose, too, that as being part of the IRA.
That's the part I wouldn't accept, Jude. I would say, McGuinness, yeah, I'm keeping quoting him here, but I remember him very clearly. He said to me, look, I didn't go looking for the war came looking for me.
Well, you see, yeah, that's true. But again, you see, John Hume and people like that would say, well, you had a choice in the end. I don't know. The thing is, I think that most people, there are two things about people who would reject the violence which McGuinness engaged in for a certain amount of time. And one of them is that many of the people who didn't engage in violence themselves didn't do it out of high principles. Yeah. Because they didn't want to get killed. Yeah. Or they didn't want to end up in jail, because that's what you were faced with if you're going to join the IRA, or presumably some loyalist paramilitary groups too. So there was that element of fear. The other thing is this: why should here Ireland be any different from any other country in the world? Because when people try to get their freedom, again and again, it involves the spilling of blood. I mean, look what's happening in the Ukraine. You know, the Ukrainians going out and saying to the Russians, would you please go home? The Russians aren't going to listen to that.
Yeah, but just to take a point, we were getting back to revert to our earlier discussion. Uh, Boris Johnson uses his own word, this thing of people to be free. If that's the case, why doesn't he allow the people of Ireland to have a vote for a border poll and let us be free? But anyway, that's a side issue.
Yeah, they say that's too complicated. Well, it certainly is a figure. I mean, it's yeah, I think actually his status will rise with the passage of years. I think
That would be
maybe
my opinion.
the violence that he was involved with, the IRA's violence, for some is a bit too raw or too close,
Yeah.
and they can't, or they say they can't stomach that. I mean, for example, I heard. Did you hear this? Now, this is sort of a side issue. I was reading a report where Joe Brawley said that he'd give his kidney as a kind of a reparation for the taking of human life by some dear to him or near to him or something like that.
Yeah.
And Kenny Donaldson, of course, was out of his traps like a greyhound, saying, "Oh, you have to tell us who these people were." I'm not. What did you think of that? Was that a wise thing for Joe Brawley to say, or not?
Well, I just freedom of speech. Joe's entitled. I don't get Donaldson or whoever Kenny Donaldson is can go all day long. Who is this and all the rest? That's got nothing to do with it. Joe, if Joe made an individual subjective choice, that's his business. Nothing to do with Kenny Donaldson.
Well, he's wanting to know who are these people that he said he did it, to make reparation for their involvement in violence, not his involvement, but their involvement. And Donaldson wants to find out who these people are and so on, and wants the PSNI to take Joe in and question him. You wouldn't approve of that, presumably?
Not at all. I think that's absolute rubbish too. Like tomorrow morning, if I said because of some personal beliefs I have, I want to give a kidney and I want to make reparation for someone I've seen in my life. It's nothing to do with, Joe Brawley has committed no criminal offence. He hasn't done anything criminal. In fact, he's done a good thing. And some political, somebody with a political agenda trying to turn that into something else, he should take a run.
Well, I tend to agree with every word you've said, Pat. You're a very wise man. Last one. And we dealt with this before. We'll deal with it very quickly here. And that is this P&O thing, where 800 workers out the door. There's no question of sitting down and going out the door. And what's more, come in, you guys that are going to work for less than that, and we'll hire 800 workers.
Yeah, no, I think we might have discussed it for a couple of minutes on Friday morning, but I didn't realize when it was only at emerged this thing that the managing director come out with this absolute rubbish that we've lost 100 million and so on, and we can't keep on going, I guess. And on the surface, you thought, oh, that's a fair point, but it's only when it emerged, right? No discussion, no prior consultation, no. They sent on private security firms with some of them apparently with possibly masks on and with handcuffs, etc. Right, here's the other thing. The company belongs to the Saudi royal family, as far as I remember. They're worth 4.9 billion, Jude. 4.9 billion. They spent 147 million, as far as I remember. I looked it up somewhere yesterday because I done a wee article on 147 million sponsoring golf. So they let 800 workers go just like that because they've lost. And by the way, because of COVID and stuff like that, it's not because they're a field ferry company. It's a combination of things this last while. They will make money again, Jude. But they just let 800 workers go, disposable, like a throwaway nappy. Like a piece of crap, just throw it away. They didn't allow any union negotiation. I don't know even about proper redundancies. They put them off. And it's not even hire and refire or fire and rehire. They're not even rehiring the people they're firing. They're taking on, I presume, people like from the Philippines and the Indian subcontinent and so on, paying them penury wages and so on. And by the way, the other thing, final thing I'm making, for years there's loopholes. These ferry companies didn't, because they were on international waters, they didn't have to pay the British minimum wage.
Mm-hmm. Well, my view would be, I think much of what you said makes a lot of sense, but this is capitalism. And the name of the game in capitalism is, can I make money by doing this? So they say, we've got 800 guys here and we're paying them this. So we could make money in this if we got some other guys to do it for less. So they did. And presumably there's no law against it. The only thing that would stop people, capitalist companies like that, acting as they do would be a strong union. Now, or else a law passed by the government that wouldn't allow them to do that kind of thing, which will never happen.
But hold on a second, Jude. I presume sorry for cutting across you, but I presume P&O have done a consultation, legal one, and they've worked out that this is illegal, and they will know they will get a fine, and they know that whatever, but they still, the calculation, I presume, is they're working out this is still cheaper.
They can factor it in. Yeah, that's pretty important. The only defense that I think that workers have is it's a very strong union. And the idea of a union is a really good one, because essentially it's saying, you're not going to pick us off one by one. It's kind of like NATO. Attack one of us and you've attacked the whole lot of us.
Take all of us,
But you see, Thatcher destroyed the unions in the 70s.
Yes.
Destroyed them. Yeah. And I'll tell you my experience. I don't know what your experience of unions is, but I don't mind saying this. The experience I had of unions in Jordanstown, lecturers union, they were better than nothing, but just about.
Yeah.
They were better than nothing, but just about. If no union was there, that would have been worse. But I can't think of anything else that was less efficient in combating management's decisions.
Yeah.
You really, I don't quite understand why people, and today, for example, we're told there are a lot of professions where there's need for workers. There's vacancies. They really need them. But why don't unionists in that sense, why don't they establish really strong unions and protect their workers in the future? Now they have a chance. Now they're in a situation where the management is coming to them, or the owners are coming to them, cap in hand, and asking them, would they please fill these posts? Use that to try to build up the unions, because at present they're almost a joke.
Well, Jude, I would love to get the old slogan, don't go with P&O. Like, I think the boycott, I certainly will go out of my way not to use P&O if I'm going to Scotland. If there's any other way to avoid them, I will certainly do that. And I think anybody with a conscience should seriously consider not using P&O.
I agree with you, Pat, but I think a real effort, you really have to mount a campaign. For example, we all know that we shouldn't be buying produce that is supporting the Israeli economy. But time and again you find, for example, you go to Marks and Sparks, there's produce there from Israel, and I don't see people looking at it. The fact of the matter is, like employers, most people go for the cheap option, and they don't want all the hard stuff about their skin.
I know, but there's a friend of mine used to go through a certain supermarket, and every time he came across, he had a pen, don't buy from Israel. I'd say the store.
If everybody took that line, you probably would change things. But by God, it's hard to get people to move from the individual.
Exactly.
And look after Mr. Number One. Anyway, Pat, that's been most refreshing. I enjoyed that. And we will talk to you again. And do you know the sun's going to shine between now and Friday? There's hardly going to be a cloud in the sky. That's what I'm told.
It's absolutely beautiful here now. Yeah. It really is. So,
there is a God after all. There is a God.
God bless you, my child.
Okay. Right, Pat.